Awesome, and we're live. Welcome everybody again to another Open RFC call. Today is Wednesday, April 29th. Um, we'll be following along the agenda that I've posted here in chat. And you can usually find the agenda. We do our best to get it out before this call. I know I've been, late most days. I think I got generated yesterday, so apologize for that. But you can be following along with these meetings in our public events calendar. The link can be found in the actual RFC issue, issue 134. Again, feel free to add yourselves as attendees to the meeting notes doc. I'll just keep spamming that link. Claudia's again agreed to do notes, so appreciate that. And I'll take notes when she gets to her RFC. Quick housekeeping. Just wanted to remind everybody that these calls and any communication in our repos is covered by NPM's Code of Conduct. So we just ask that everybody be mindful and thoughtful when speaking and letting other people speak as well. And is tradition, just to raise your hand if you want to comment on a topic. And yeah, just if you're looking for the actual full code of conduct, we have it there linked in the repo, which can be found at npm/rfcs on github.com. And again, these calls, the desired outcome here is essentially we want to create another channel for our community to be working with us and hopefully pushing forward topics and RFCs that we find important and we want to make happen a lot faster. So before we get started, is there any announcements that anybody wanted to bring up? Nope. Any introductions? I didn't see at least one. Or Thorix. Did you want to say hi?
Hey everyone, I'm Otto. This is my first NPM RFC meeting, so very cool. Also, welcome to the larger Microsoft organization now that that's all official.
Thanks.
For sure. Thank you. Awesome. So if that's all we have for introductions and announcements, let's dive into the first item, which is RFC number 117, running commands and workspaces. Roy, did you want to speak to this? I know you can't be in the call the whole time, so.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, this is pretty much the leftover from the original Workspaces RFC. So what we want to do here is standardizing like the set of commands that will be able to run across all the workspaces. So it's kind of like a desired outcome to be able to just npm install, and then you get all the workspaces installed, and also like you can run basic commands like test. So you can npm test and have tests run across all the nested workspaces. But there's a few commands we already sourced in the original work there. I can quickly share my screen so like you can follow up with the. Can you see my screen?
I know that. Yep. And I know that Wes and I think Jordan also had just within the last 24 hours also commented on
yeah, Wes mentioned that he was like late to the party, but he wasn't at all because yeah, we're still wrapping up work on the original implementation for the workspaces, just getting things installed properly in place using Arborist. So yeah, only now we're actually starting to discuss the commands again. So yeah, I think just to quickly go over this, basically we identified a subset of commands that we definitely want to support that are relevant to the context of workspaces. And the idea of being able to filter a subset of workspaces. So basically we could add a command like npm ss, and then you can define a name of one of your nested workspaces and have a command run there. And along with that, I also identified a potential idea to create like alias. So you could basically like create groups of workspaces you have internally. So like the example that Jordan say, like let's say you have a group of workspaces that you commonly like they're commonly used together. Let's say example dash something. They're maybe located in a specific place. So you could define like this alias, like to have a group of workspaces so that you can run any command on this specific group or subset.
Do you want questions now, or should I wait until you're done?
I think I'm done. Like this goes
Oh,
over
okay.
the implementation right there. So yeah, go ahead.
So on the one for filtering, like, is there a reason not to like follow kind of Lerna's pattern of dash scope? Which is that this command is identical, except that if you want it to run on a subset of workspaces, you pass an argument with a glob, and then that glob runs against your, with your workspace settings against everything.
Yeah, we started
instead of making
from
it like
there.
a separate top level command.
Yeah. So let me give some context on it. We started from there in the original RFC because the original RFC was listing this idea. So we started from there. But I think we might have named it filter instead of scope, but it was basically the same thing, right?
Yeah, how it's spelled is not important.
Yeah. So I think we gathered some feedback that like people would like basically want to have something nicer than the option, but it's just the initial discussion. So like if you think that's better than this proposal right here, it's definitely the right moment to give that feedback.
What I guess what I mean is first of all, workspace versus WS, those seems like aliases of the same command, not like they should do different things. So
Yeah.
If it's going to be a separate top level command, I feel like it would be important that it be something that has an intuitive name that conveys what it does. And I'd be surprised if that intuitive name was shorter than typing dash dash and then something like filter and equals.
Right.
And like that seems to be really the trade-off between the two is, do you type the standard thing like npm workspace dash dash something equals your filter, or do you type npm workspace dash filter space your filter, right? Like I'm sure we could jump through some hoops to find a way to make either one of them shorter than the other one. But if we're going for an intuitive, nice long name where each form maybe has some nice comfortable aliases that are shorter, like npm install, npm I, right? Then my expectation is that it'll end up being simpler as a single top level command. Like you could do dash F and dash dash filter, or maybe dash F is a bad one because that means force. But like you could have a long and a short version of the filter parameter name, and have a long and a short version of the top level command name. So it's npm workspace dash dash package dash scope equals foo or something could be the long one, and then you could do npm ws dash p foo. Right, and that also mirrors kind of npx in a way, so everyone kind of understands a little bit what that would mean. And then like I don't know, just throwing that out there.
So I think in this proposal, like right now, at least, we don't have that sort of backwards compatibility or the idea of like adding scope. Like I think the intent here originally was the first argument is the filtered workspace, nested workspace or package. Right.
But what if you then omit it?
Right.
That's where it gets really confusing, because there's always going to be edge cases where you can't figure out what they mean. And like I know this because NVM has like a bunch of commands like this, and so I've ran into a bunch of cases where I am just unable to add new kinds of commands because any positional argument could already mean something. And so what I've started to do with new APIs is always give them explicit option names, and positional arguments either don't exist at all or in my APIs, or they're like, it's for something where like the input is always file paths. So multiple positional arguments is always multiple file paths, and that's it. And I've found that to be more maintainable with like changes in the future.
Sure. I do feel like the colon might be too much personally, like too far.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Like how I
Yeah.
feel.
Agree.
Yeah, it was kind of like
I would
my.
have interpreted it.
But these three are basically like three ideas just to start the discussion.
Yeah, like the super verbose workspace and then the alias WS, I feel like that's intuitive enough that those make sense. The colon definitely
Yeah.
gets into a territory where it's a bit tougher, but way more terse. So
I think it
But
would
yeah, I
also
guess
be helpful to go through, you said you started with the filter or -scope sort of idea. I think it would be helpful to add a little bit of that context here to help
In here, yeah.
people. Yeah, just because, like, to me, if I had seen, sorry, truck, of course, right when I start to talk, had I seen that conversation, it might make more sense to me why we're here where we're at. Because I jumped a little, like, and I mentioned this in the one comment I left, which is like, this seemed a little bit weird to me when there's other ways to do that. But I think had I seen, we looked at what -scope did in Lerna and we were trying to replicate it, I think I maybe would have, come to a different place.
Well, in either whatever decision's made, in the future, when everybody inevitably says, well, why the hell didn't you just implement it this way? This document should answer that question. So like, just good to flesh it out. But yeah, I guess, so I regardless of the bike shedding about what the command and aliases names are and what the parameter name is and stuff, like we can paint that later. But I feel like it's useful to explore whether the filter should be just an implicit positional argument. Like in JavaScript terms, this is whether like, this is the old style of a function that can take like a callback argument or options comma callback, and then the function has to do a bunch of gymnastics to figure out which one you did. And like those have pretty much universally been considered bad APIs now, and like nobody designs their API that way anymore. And for new stuff. And so like I feel like that's the same situation here. It's very like implicit, and it's not always clear. Like when if I see a command in instructions, it's not necessarily going to be clear to me what it's doing. If it's just npm ws foo test, is that running an executable called foo that I installed, or is that like who knows, right? Like I'd have to intimately know how my workspace was structured to know how that works, and like that feels a little much to me to avoid typing some dashes and an equal sign.
So just a quick check. So let's make sure I'm on the same page here. What we're bike shedding right now is, are you doing npm ws name of workspace command, or are you doing npm ws command with a config argument, with a config option that sets what workspace you're talking about? That's the question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I could not possibly have less of an opinion about this. I think the only, I mean, if I were to try to, like, if I was forced to, like, gun to my head to make a decision on this one, personally, I would say, like, let's either copy whatever Yarn and Lerna do. If they do the same thing, then that's all the more, like, that's extremely compelling. Like, that's obviously the paved path, right or wrong. The other small consideration is that config flags and config options that we pass in the CLI are also config values that can be in an npm RC file, and that's kind of that could be either a positive or a negative. The positive of it is it gives you a little bit more flexibility. You could specify what workspace to operate on by by putting that in the environment or somewhere else. On the other hand, you could end up in a situation where, I'm trying to run commands against one workspace, but I have this config file way over here that's setting it to go to a different one. So configs are sort of more, ought to be more broadly understood than just within the scope of a single command in most cases. They should be something that you could at least conceivably want to put in an RC file. Now, that's not the case for everything. Prefix is a great example, and prefix is suitably weird that, when we shifted from in the npm 0.x days from everything being a global package to defaulting to local packages, prefix kind of got weird, and it's always been a little weird ever since. So if you specify it on the CLI, then it applies to the local target, but what's in the config is always just set as the global target, and we have to do a bunch of hoop jumping. So I wouldn't want to get ourselves into a situation like that. There's also cases where it's actively dangerous to put it in a config file, like with force, right? You probably don't want to do npm config set force true, or else like things are going to be a mess forever.
But is that a hard and fast rule that every command line option must always be configurable through nvars/config? Like,
Yes, I mean, yes, without some additional work in a lot of different places. So
okay.
it gets very inelegant very quickly whenever we have exceptions to that rule. And currently, the only exception is prefix.
But yeah, like you said, force seems like a viable candidate for being an exception.
Yeah, but there are scripts out there in the wild where force is getting set on the environment, and we wouldn't want to break that. That subject did come up, several years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That was the result when we checked it out then. Yeah, so if we're going to add something like that, I would be a little cautious about that. It may be that's fine, that it's unlikely that somebody's going to set it in a config file, or that you actually do want it to be in transferable through the environment. So if I'm running something against a single package, and then something in that package runs a script, like maybe npm test runs some other npm command, and now it is getting that config sort of inherited. And so that's kind of the hazard. Whereas with force, like if I want to do something with -f, I want force to be set everywhere in every subsequent npm command that could be done. That's the point. But yeah, and I mean, also with like OTP is another good example of that. You'd never want to put OTP in your config file, like, because it's not going to be valid after 90 seconds. But if what I do want to be able to do is do like npm run release --otp equals my TOTP code, and then when npm run release actually calls npm publish, it's already got that, so I don't have to enter it a second time. Yeah, so the other thing is we could explore putting, making the command itself namespaced in some way. I don't know if that's.
You mean like a separate?
Like I posted in chat, like workspace
so,
:foo, for example, where it's not a config flag, so it bypasses that rule. But I mean, I'm not really focused on the implementation or the implementation consequences as you are in this case. I'm more thinking about the usability of certainly of typing in the command, but more importantly, the usability of looking at a command that someone else has written and knowing what it does without having to run it.
So another approach is we always take a positional argument after the WS command, right? So you do npm workspace space foo test, and if you really want it to be all of them, then you do npm workspace hyphen test or something like that, or npm workspace star test. Like there's a lot of ways that we can say.
Would star work, or would shells expand that?
Shell would expand that. So hyphen would be,
that's where it gets, yeah.
Would be one. Dot would be another. I don't know. There's a lot of ways we could potentially do that and kind of thread that needle. I wouldn't want to over optimize for for making the filter really elegant if a lot of the time people are going to want to not have a filter anyway.
I think it depends on the command type. For install, they'll almost never want to filter. For test, they will probably not want to filter. But for lint, well, for test or lint, if they're making changes to one project, they would want the filter. And if they're making changes to dependencies or configuration, they would not want the filter. I think they're both pretty common.
So just to be mindful of time, because we do have about 4 or 5 other items I know we want to get to. Also, Jordan, is your hand still up, or are you good for now? Okay.
Sorry.
Just because I know you pasted it in chat, did you have any feedback yourself?
No, just that I felt like in Yarn they separate out workspaces versus workspaces. And that sort of distinction is enough to be able to say like it works for nearly everything I've needed for the last year.
Awesome.
So I wanted to point out that one thing that's interesting here is that filtering to a subset of workspaces is very similar to defining an alias and then using the alias, right? So if we look at 2 and 3 here, I really like 3 because I think that aligns well with how people think about their code, right? It's like most of the workspaces we see are like packages and services, right? Or like something like this where they're grouped. And it just so happens that people end up putting those in directories often. And so they don't have like this arbitrary grouping, but we have repos that have grown over time and could really benefit from having a packages group where it defines multiple locations, because like some engineers came in and decided, well, we actually want this segment off it into a, you know, a different area. And to be able to say, well, I want to run the tests on all the packages across the 7 directories we so happen to put them in, I think is a really nice feature. And it ends up being basically the exact same thing as saying, well, I want an alias, I want to be able to filter by, you know, / packages and / my packages and, you know, / this other directory star, right? Which is really the same thing. It's just less arbitrary because you actually have to put it in the package JSON. So I think we should look at like how those 2 features would interplay and what like real use cases we want to unlock here, right? Because I think that there might be a way that you could like do the first one, the subset, with the aliasing, if you could maybe make it like some sort of arbitrary, define a alias or a grouping rather, you know, on the command line as well, right? We might be able to get those to play well together.
Yeah.
Or maybe it might mean that we don't need filters at all if we have aliases, right? Because I don't think people typically are going like wild with like, well, I want that package and that package and that package. They're like, no, run it across all of them, or that's very clear, constant subset.
Mm-hmm. That was definitely my idea here when I was defining. So here I have an example running the tests in only the plugins group, right? Plugins alias here. So yeah, that's definitely the idea of having the grouping feature along with the subset.
Yeah, and that just means you have to define your your filters sort of up front in your package JSON, which I think it sounds like what you're saying, Wes, and I kind of agree with you. I suspect that most of the time that's actually going to be fine, because you want to run your integration tests against the part of my app that I'm working on. I don't need to run all of the database tests when I'm testing the front end. I just want to test my front end code.
Yep, and I think that it might end up working out that we have 2 distinct and almost 100% covering use cases. One is we have a static set of groupings, and the other one is I want to run it against one single package, right? So I think if we do that, then it makes this a lot simpler, because it's, you know, running from the top level but one package, or running from the top level and running an alias, and that would actually simplify, I think, the positional arguments quite a bit, and you know, might make it more understandable than the arbitrary glob pattern as a position argument.
Yeah,
I completely agree.
Yeah, and I think it also just something that or to remind me, like I definitely took this from Yarn View 1 implementation. So that was the way Yarn was doing it, and Lerna was doing the scope. So I kind of switched between them when I opened this RFC over here. So there's definitely that.
So Roy, next up,
it'd be worth checking out what other workspaces tools like Rush and stuff do as well. I know they're way less popular, but like it'd still be good to get the data points as to what decisions they made.
For sure. So is there anything, Wes, you want to add then on the RFC itself, like in terms of that recommendation though?
No, that's I think my comment was really addressed sort of by this conversation, so no.
Okay, cool. So it sounds like we should update that a bit in terms of language, and then prior art probably makes sense as well, Roy.
Yeah, I'll definitely put some more backstory info there.
Cool. Just to move things along, if there's any other conversation folks want to have, feel free to add to and comment on the RFC itself. But moving along, I want to quickly touch on the overrides RFC. I know we've done 2 deep dives on that. Just want to give Isaac a second here to maybe give an update on where that's at.
Yeah, quick update. I think the thing that makes the most sense is sort of where we landed in the Slack and GitHub threads on this. Basically, at each level, only the first match against the selection spec is going to be the one that gets honored at a given node. If you want to apply an override to that node as well as overriding its subdependencies, then you add a dot member in that object, and that sort of applies to the thing that the object matched against. The further restriction that the dot member cannot be an object, so we don't get into like really weird nightmare scenarios. And it's just a literal period. There's no like dot at foo. So I think with that, I actually have everything I need to finish the RFC, and I'm glad we got there before I'd gone too much further through the implementation section. But it should be relatively straightforward and simplifies a lot of the harder cases now that we're back to, only like first hit wins and nothing else will be applied. So if you do have things where I'm overriding, foo at 2, and I have another override for foo at 2.x, that second one is just irrelevant because it'll never hit something that wasn't hit by the first one. I don't have to worry about like, hitting one and then rechecking and rechecking. So that's about it. It's pending me writing some English words.
Sounds good. Feel free, folks, to add comments there. I know we've already discussed that at length. So, but yeah, so that should get updated maybe by the time that we reconvene here.
I would expect to have an update this week. Yes, on that. Yeah.
Cool. So moving along, RFC. This is, I didn't put the number here, sorry. This is our RFC. I know, again, Isaac, you kicked off this discussion, I think last week, for opting out of optional meta dependencies.
I think that might have been a while ago, but yeah.
Oh yeah, this is back in March. I want to just see where we were at with this conversation since Wes had chimed in.
I don't have much to add here other than it does seem like this is a legitimate problem, although both the solutions I've seen, one was that environment-based or whatever dependency, and this one, both seem really complicated for what is like a pretty simple like problem, I think. I don't know. Or I say complicated in that it puts a lot of burden on package maintainers. Both of them do, to understand these concepts. And I'm not entirely sure that the use cases are important enough and or that complicated enough to warrant such a robust solution.
Yeah, the core issue that I think has been driving a lot of the attention on this and a lot of the desire for this is the fact that Chokidar is extremely widely used, and Chokidar tries to install FS events on non-OS X systems, which then blow up with a whole bunch of build errors, which are then ignored. And it's like, it's this perfect storm of terrible UX. Like if you have build errors and it's an optional dependency, we should just not trouble the user with that. So that's happening in NPM v7. B, if it's an optional dependency and it specifies an OS that it works on and you're not on that OS, we shouldn't even try. Like, skip it. Don't even waste time downloading it. So that's also happening in NPM v7. And these features are both already in Arborist. And I suspect that a lot of the call for optional deps that are not installed by default, or don't try to install the optional deps of a thing I'm depending on, will actually be, there'll actually be a lot less call for it once NPM 7 gets out in the wild. The other thing that is a little bit interesting is, and the use case that I know Corey Farrell had brought up, is the idea where you have the situation where I have an optional dependency that provides polyfills. And if you don't need these polyfills, then you shouldn't have to bother with them, right? Like if you know you're running on a modern OS platform, then, or only in modern browsers or whatever, or only on Node, then you don't need the polyfills, and it's fine that the optional dep is missing. However, if the optional dep is there, then we'll try to use it. And in that case, you do want to restrict what version of the optional dependency you're able to work with, because the thinking there being like, look, if I try to load this polyfill package and it's the wrong version, then my whole thing is going to blow up. So I have it listed as an optional dependency so I don't get the wrong one, but I actually don't need it at all most of the time. And if it's just missing, then that's fine. So we had talked about this a little bit in the context of the accept dependencies RFC, where perhaps one of the accept dependencies that you could specify for a given dependency would be null. And that would be basically a way of saying, I need to get version 1.x, but also if it's completely missing, that's fine.
Jordan, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, so this seems backwards to me. So like, first of all, for browser polyfills, the current Node version is irrelevant. So when you say polyfills and you're using the engines field, that really only applies for Node polyfills.
We're not talking about engines. I'm not talking about engines in this context. When I'm
Okay,
talking about
I mean,
polyfills,
but in general with polyfills, they're with engines, you usually say this version and later is what I work with. Polyfills, you work with the new versions. So you usually don't say I am needed on these versions but I work on these versions. You just say, oh, I work on Node 4+ or whatever. But like, even if I'm only needed until Node 6. So like, would this be a new package JSON field for these polyfill packages to define the maximum version that they're needed for?
No, this is not about engines. So this is a case where I have an optional dependency. It's optional, I don't need it. And in fact, I don't want it to be installed by default when you install my package.
Oh, okay.
But
this is like a new category of optional dependencies that isn't auto installed.
Like, even more optional.
This is where I'm going, like, this
optional.
seems like we're going really complicated here for like trying to solve for a case where the end result is the package user needs to just say, I want to install this, and they install it at the top level and the problem's done, right? Like if they need it because they're running on an old Node version or it's a browser polyfill, like
right,
they have to know that their code's going to break. They're going to see.
Isn't this optional peer dependencies, which Yarn asked us to add for peer dependencies meta?
No, and we did add optional peer dependencies. This is a little bit different. So peer dependencies have the restriction that it must be a peer dependency, or an optional peer dep has the restriction that it must be a peer dep, but not being present at all is also fine. The thing about optional dependencies is there actually is a restriction there. In order for the tree to be considered correct, the optional dependency must either be in the specified range or missing. So example, rimraf has an optional dependency on glob. If you don't have glob installed, that's fine. But if you just npm install rimraf, you're going to get glob along with it. Now, if you have, let's say we do a breaking change to node glob and it changes the API in such a way that it will no longer work with rimraf. If I install that new version of glob with rimraf, it's not okay for it to be a different version, right? So that will be considered a error in the dependency graph. What this proposal would be talking about is saying, I want rimraf to install by default without glob support. If you want glob support, then you can install glob along with it, but it has to be version X in order to function properly. I think, Wes, I think that you're right that this is probably enough of an edge case that we could just kind of punt it for a few years.
Well, wouldn't Yarn v2 make that not work? Because your package, or Yarn v2 or Tink or anything that's an approach like that would mean that if your package doesn't list glob as a dependency, it can't require it.
Right. So it would list glob as an optional dependency. And
So like it would, these tools would then be adapt to include
Yeah.
these as requirable things if available.
right. So it's a declared dependency. The only solution for it right now is for this kind of behavior, if that's what you want, is to declare it as is to not declare it as a dependency, which means you might get the wrong version as well. And on PNPM or Yarn v2, you just don't get it at all ever. So yeah, so the thing that we're talking about here is like it'd be a way to restrict the version number, the versions that I'm able to get, without requiring that it be installed automatically. So it's sort of like a no optional flag on this one particular optional dependency. I'm happy punting this until 2021, honestly. Like I don't think it's a huge problem, and I think the thing that is a huge problem is solved in other ways.
I mean, could that also be solved with concatenated protocols like git plus SSH? You could say like optional plus npm, and then you just leave it in dependencies or dev dependencies or wherever it's supposed to be, and then you don't have to invent new categories. It's just
we could certainly like at other ways to express it and like figure out what's the most kind of implementation and user experience efficient way to implement it, or we could not implement it. Which I think is certainly the most implementation efficient. It might not be, and it's a tough call whether it's the most user experience efficient, because it's kind of fine right now. So maybe adding another thing is just yet another thing.
Yeah. So on that topic specifically, then can we close out the issue then?
Maybe mark it as
revisit in
revisit in npm v8.
18 months. Okay. That might be a good idea, though. Yeah. Actually, just to label it properly and then reference this discussion.
Yeah. I'll make a note that the kind of core problem that spawned this is already being solved. Similar to that other issue, I believe it was, what was it, 120 or 112? Yeah,
like environment dependent ones. Yeah, it's 120. I'm pretty sure.
120 has some really surprisingly complicated impacts. I believe I'm a little bit scared of what this suggests. I think that.
Oh, go ahead.
And this is also specifically based on, kind of the Chokidar FS events issue, which npm v6 and 5 do not handle very well.
So I was just gonna say, one other thing we are, talking about here is these are all problems that are on maintainers of packages to solve. And I think it's pretty fine to say like, look, if you're in this situation, we're specifically architecting your package with this requirement, here are other ways you can solve this that have a good user experience. And we know that there's certain ways that just don't. And if we just document some of the ways that work fairly well, wrap your thing in, like wrap it in a try-catch, your requires in a try-catch, and like you're fine. Maybe it doesn't work with ESM or whatever, but like that's just the requirement you have in the case of being Chokdar and you want to, not declare this dependency or declare it and have yarn v2 work. Like if we just have some documentation around this, it sort of circumvents the need for having complex solutions for those very specific maintainers.
Yeah, and I think that with the Chokidar FS events issue, like npm v7 is going to do the right thing. So they could just do nothing and the experience will get better. Like what they're doing now is fine. They're try catching the require. They're kind of doing the standard optional dependency thing. It's just the install experience sucks. And we're making that better. So problem solved.
So if you can reference again, Isaac, the fact that we're, we have those environment checks essentially in place for when we're installing optional deps, and just essentially circle back on the issue itself, that'd be great. Jordan, do you have your hand up? Nope.
Sorry, I keep forgetting to lower it.
Awesome. So just wanted to move things along because spent some time on that. I know, Claudia, you've brought forward this RFC 133 for remove depth from npm outdated. I can take notes if you want to speak to that.
So hey everyone, I'm Claudia. For the past couple of days, I've been working on refactoring npm outdated with Arborist, and I've noticed a couple of interesting things. The bottom line of this RFC is basically to remove the depth flag in favor of having a new one called maybe all, which would be to display all outdated packages from a tree. Basically, what we currently have is display all outdated packages from top level dependencies. Display a specific package that could be outdated, and it seems to me that in most cases what most users do is depth 999 just to basically see all outdated packages. So it seems to me more clear and straightforward to just remove that one, because it's highly unlikely for users to try to check outdated packages for a specific depth, like depth level 3 or whatever. So all just seems clearer to me as a configuration flag. That's pretty much the bottom line of the RFC.
Has anybody had a chance to look this over yet, or?
Yeah, I didn't have many comments, but until now that we've had this conversation from a little bit earlier where every flag has to be a config option, which I didn't realize before, but then I'm like, oh, all as a config option is a bit, depth as a config option is even weird. So I don't know how that rule applies here. But other than that, I'm a big thumbs up for this change.
For context, we're also already removing depth from npm update, so it also makes sense to remove it from.
And to be clear, the unflagged behavior of npm outdated won't change.
No.
Right. The output might slightly. Right now,
Fine, yeah.
Right now the output from npm outdated shows the location within the logical tree, and every time somebody says logical tree, you should shudder and gasp and realize it's a bug, because the dependency graph is not a tree. It's a graph. There are nodes with multiple routes into them. So when we sort of cast it as a tree, we end up in the situation where you might get 7 different lines for something as being outdated with 7 different locations, when in fact it's all talking about a single installed dependency. It's just there's 7 other things depending on it.
Yeah, that was another topic I wanted to discuss about, the UI of the command, basically, because as Isaac mentioned, right now it feels like if we decide going on this for this all flag, we can end up having also a lot of noise and a lot of info on the terminal for packages that are dedup, but they're not being distinguished right now by the npm outdated command. So I've also been trying to think of ideas of how to make it the less noisy possible on the terminal while displaying everything that is outdated.
One question I have, would the JSON flag also work with this? Still, I don't see any mention of that. I would assume yes, but I just want to make sure.
The JSON flag, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Any other
Yeah,
comments?
I'm fine with it being pretty noisy, to be honest. I mean, when you look at the output, I think it's fine. And if you're going for all, like you probably want, I think, most of that information.
Okay.
Would be my guess. So.
Seems pretty uncontroversial. I think we're all pretty aware of the way that the community and user land is currently using depth. So it's all or nothing. Cool. So can we potentially look at ratifying this?
Right, but we didn't address the all as a config option. I don't want to continually have that discussion necessarily every time we talk about a new flag. But we should at least make sure that we're all on the same page with what are the actual requirements here, because that's going to be a weird one.
Right. So some other approaches that we could use. So if we wanted all to be a config value, and certainly there are some config flags that have been added rather casually over the years, and we're trying to kind of bring some order to them and how we manage the npm CLI's dependencies. We should definitely take a look at like where, or just kind of sit down and have a think about where else -- all might make sense. Would you ever want to do like, I don't know, npm audit -- all, like what would that mean? Or npm ls -- all might be another one. where perhaps by default ls only shows the top level dependencies, somewhat like Yarn, but then a -- all would say, no, show me the entire tree and all of the dependency links and everything else. We could also reuse the existing -- option, which is there for, if you do npm ls -- long, it will, show kind of extended information about these things. So we could use reuse that existing config option.
I think these are all sort of beating around the problem here, though, which is these just don't make sense as config options. Like if you say long and you intended its use as it is today, and now suddenly you're running another command and you didn't realize, oh, I set that config option because of this other case, like now you're suddenly getting long output that you didn't expect. I feel like that's sort of...
Can you set config options scope to commands?
Yeah, like nested config.
No. I mean, there's
Long write RFC for that.
So I've ran into this where the Airbnb was broken for a while because we set some flag in npm for npm install, and it also affected npm shrink wrap, and we didn't realize that because they happened to use the same names, even though they didn't do exactly the same things. So given that it's a global scope, that the names are kind of dangerous.
So yeah, this sounds like another conversation, by the way, just to be mindful of the actual topic.
There's a trade-off between simplicity and order here, or like simplicity of user experience and simplicity of I don't know how liberal or persnickety your options parser is. At the far liberal end of the spectrum, you've got npm, which just says, YOLO configs are everywhere. They go in one big pile. On the other side, you have things where, like if you pass the argument to find before the path name or after the path name, it like yells at you because they have completely different meanings, and then that can be really confusing, right? If you do -a before or after a get command, it's totally different. And that's also its own sort of UX hazard. What we don't have is any way to say, use this config option when you're running this particular command only. That would be a great idea to explore it in RFC. But it's just, fact of the matter is today we don't do that. So I'm actually fine with this reusing -- long, since it is very similar to the way that long is used with ls and some other commands. And having it as a config option doesn't feel that hazardous to me, though we should be conservative about adding new ones.
So maybe we can, I'm not sure if we actually, was long in this RFC, or is that something you could add?
No, I should have brought that up in my review, but I didn't.
FYI, long is already a config flag for outdated, and it just displays more info for the packages. Yeah, it displays the homepage URL and the type of the dependency.
Right. So that's another. So we might not then want npm outdated -- long to also be a way to say traverse the entire tree.
Yeah. So
yeah, in that case, all might make the most sense. Then just add a new one. I don't know.
So Wes, if you want to actually comment just about the hazard that you consider, like something like all, if you
sure, yeah, I can do that right now. Yeah.
Okay. And then it does sound like we have an opportunity to talk about sort of the way that we're handling config today. That could be a separate even discussion that we bring up for another time. Because it sounds like this is going a lot broader than just the outdated. And it also sounds like we can't move quickly on ratifying this RFC right now until we figure out what we're going to do with that flag. So. Cool. So if folks can please add notes into the RFC itself, that'd be great. And we can have discussion about whether or not we want to move forward with -- all. I want to get to, I'm not sure if anybody's on the call that would have been in the discussion around the RFC 121. So proposal for package version. I know we spoke about this a bit in our last Open RFC call. I don't think there's been any activity. This is the proposal for adding like commitish syntax to package version. Did we have any update or comment on this last time we brought it up? If not, I'd love to jump to the last one since Orda is here, the last PR, which is, just added into the notes.
126.
26. Awesome. Orda, would you like to speak to this a bit? I know we weren't able to get you on the call the last time we talked about it.
Cool. So at a high level, like TypeScript is kind of in a lot of different places nowadays, and where the information about TypeScript support is also sort of disparate in many different places. What I tried to do was try to make an RFC that allows for TypeScript-like types annotations to be sort of declared and available inside the NPM registry. So the problem today is that right now the only real sort of index of NPM packages that have types included in them. So like you have shipped with a .dts file included in your package is on the Algolia search index, where I added some code that sort of every time they now look inside the file system to see if a DTS file can be found. And that then adds this sort of little bit of JSON to the search index. And then that makes those available to be able to say, okay, so there are two sources of all types, NPM packages that are included, and then there's a definitely typed registry. And the definitely typed registry, there's many ways to get access to that. But the NPM types included in NPM are trickier to find. So this RFC says, add a single flag that says like types are included in this, and that's it. And that gets put inside the pacument that goes inside the registry, and then any tool can sort of just look at that and then also look at definitely typed. And the same can be applied for like flow or for other future type system things that could come out.
So I think when we discussed this last, and I apologize, Orda, we didn't ping you to be in this discussion. I think when we talked about this last, we were talking about the ability to add metadata to a pacument already to identify whether or not maybe a package is, a typed or has like TypeScript definitions, right? Type definitions inside of it, so that there was potentially a way to give you the information you wanted, or for the ecosystem essentially to get this information out. Is that right, Isaac?
Yeah, where I think we were, where we sort of got to and wanted to sort of pick your brain about a little bit in your thinking behind this RFC is like, why not just add a field to your package JSON that says explicitly, this is my type file, and this is the type of type file that it is. And then that would be in the package manifest, and would not have to be kind of automatically inferred in like a magic like underscore property. It's a little bit more, there's a little bit more complexity with adding a new privileged top level field like that, because we have to make sure that nobody is using it. We have to make sure we're not kind of creating incompatibilities or whatever. But I think it's pretty straightforward in this case, and it's just going to be a matter of looking and seeing if that's currently in use. One way we could do it. There was also some concern about kind of over privileging TypeScript, versus other type of libraries. But I think that TypeScript is kind of the dominant one, and even the other ones have very similar ways of declaring their type definition files. So we could do something where we say, the types field is an object where you give it a file and a type. What flavor of types it is. So you would say like, my type definition is TypeScript and it's in foo.d.ts. Or you could say my type definition is flow and it's in foo.js.flow. And if we did that, I mean, you can do that today, right? Like you can do that today. We can put it in the package JSONs, and it will take time for people to start using it.
Yep.
The next step might, once we have that, then npm init could default to it. Npm publish could even read that in and say, well, you haven't defined a type file, but I see this index, you have a foo.js and a foo.d.ts. I'm gonna go ahead and guess that those two are connected. If we can do that in a deterministic way that's not likely to have false positives, then I mean, I'd have no problem with that, with defaulting it.
So today we've been recommending people add types. Like it's in the package manifest. So there's types and there's typings, which is an older version. But the thing is, like, because TypeScript supports the node resolution and sort of just hijacks putting DTS files first, then it's optional effectively.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can resolve sort of the index or the main, I think it's main in the package manifest,
mm-hmm.
and hit a DTS file or a I think it's a .js.flow file for flow.
Yep.
Then you are guaranteed to have like types in that package.
Right. So the trick then is, and we can look for that file and default the field just fine. I would definitely, the RFC kind of proposes having a Boolean that just says there are types here.
Yeah.
I'd very much prefer to have something that says not just there are types here, but here they are. Like this is the file that has the types.
Yeah.
That would also open the door for us to in npm pack list to ensure that we actually include that in the package JSON and the package tarball. So that so we don't have situations where like you've published a TypeScript package, but you forgot to include your types because you're using files.
Yeah. So using the current types, you can check that right now with the types in the manifest. Again, it all just comes down to like, I'm sure there will be people that will just be like I have, more importantly, I think people that run JavaScript libraries get thrown a index.d.ts file to them by some random TypeScripters, and they never know to like add the types, like package field or something like that. So that's generally always why we've had to sort of rerun the node resolution over it when I've been trying to do it at like full ecosystem level. Mm-hmm. And so this included could like, yeah, that just is just the basic, but it could direct to the root. You could have you would typically have many different .dts files, one that represents every single file in your project. And so you could define a root, and that could be the one that's there instead of just a Boolean.
So I have a question, and I think it relates a little bit here. So one of the things that we've been trying to figure out for, I don't know, a long time for Express is like how we can like tell people here's where you can get these types that we don't maintain.
Yeah.
Like, and one of the big problems that has happened is since we don't maintain them and we don't intend to maintain them and we don't want to maintain them, unless somebody steps forward, like what we're going to do permanently is say, good luck. Right? What we'd like to be able to do is say, good luck, here are some at a specific version that somebody came by and said, there's no file in your repo. There's one field in your package JSON that points to an entirely different package at a very specific version.
Yep.
And then that's the maximum that we as the Express team need to maintain. Would this allow for something, or could we restructure this to allow for something like that, where it's just like the single line in the package JSON that says, go to definitely typed. Here's the package name under definitely typed that has the most accurate typings we know of, right? Or something like that.
Honestly, that's a good idea. But not today, but I don't think it's unreasonable for us to support the types being a full @types/express. And that would solve what you're doing, especially if you added the version specifier in it.
The version specifier is specifically important to us because we're fine if somebody comes in and says, no, you're on Express, 4.16, but actually the types haven't changed since 4.0 maybe even, right? So like we don't know if that's true or not, right? So we just want to have some like, we did have somebody come in and verify that at that version it worked, and that's like our maximum amount of commitment.
Yeah, this is something that's come up with Node Tap quite a few times as well. I on a fairly regular basis get folks posting an issue saying you should add TypeScript info.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I'll accept a PR for it as long as there's a test and it works, and it will break if I break it, because what I don't want to do is have, I change the return value of something, and then the types are now invalid and folks get mad at me because of that. Otherwise, it belongs somewhere else because I'm not going to maintain it unless there's a test for it. Quite often the response is, well, just rewrite it in TypeScript and then you'll get it for free. And I'm like, yeah, good. Okay.
Yeah, so we actually sorry if we're going over time, but
No.
we do have solutions for this, which I'm writing docs for at the moment, that allows you to have your JavaScript project that will generate TypeScript definitions, and you can have tests on those too.
Yeah, that would actually be really helpful. I mean, I'd be happy to include it in the package if there was an easy maintainable way to do it. It's just, I don't know. I'm an old fogey JavaScripter. Like,
I have types in none of my packages, and I would put them in all of them if I had a way to prevent future drift.
Yeah.
Completely agree. And I think this is the biggest bone I've had to pick. It's not even about being old fogey JavaScript. It's just like, this is a whole new ecosystem, and to support it takes work. And we as maintainers are already overloaded. We don't have enough time to do even the basic stuff that we are expected to do. So how are we expected to also then support TypeScript? It's not whether we like it or not. I like TypeScript. I think it's cool. I want to support it. I don't have the bandwidth. And so if you all can come in and say, no, here's how you can do this in a way that our consumers who are writing TypeScript applications will be able to seamlessly work with you at a very minimal, low effort, thing.
Yeah.
You're going to get tons of adoption just by that.
Yeah. So I think we've gotten a little bit far afield of the core RFC here. The main things and we are already 5 minutes over time. So I think really the main thing to kind of dig into a little bit further would be, is there something more informative than a Boolean field that we can have there? What's currently in use within the various typed JavaScript-ish language communities? And then, like, I would really strongly prefer to just have it be an explicit thing that a maintainer puts in their package.json rather than a thing that we try to infer on the registry within the manifest. And then we can, once we have that established pattern based on kind of explicit author intent, we can look at how to infer it. And I think that there are going to be, clear ways to do that.
Okay, cool.
And sounds like if there's any other discussion, feel free to add it to the PR itself. This is definitely something that this is not the first time I've heard this conversation come up. So awesome.
It is the first time somebody's wanted to step up and actually run it though. So props to you, Orta. Thanks.
Yeah, appreciate you making the RFC. It's good.
Welcome.
Yeah. Awesome. And hopefully we'll see you around here more often. So thanks again, everybody, for jumping on for another call. I apologize again. We went a little bit over. We'll try to be mindful of time going forward for sure. We also got started late again, so that's on me. I'll try to make sure that we have a deep dive conversation poll created after this, since we didn't get time to talk about what we'd like to go in depth for next week. So I'll put a number of the discussions and topics in that poll, and then we can vote on what we'd like to dig into next week. Again, appreciate everybody sticking around, and thanks for joining another NPM Open RFC call. I'll see you soon.
Thanks for running it.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.